exposé, je vais aborder cette question
I'm
de
going
la
to
place de la
talk
femme,
about
la
the
place
place of
changeante
woman,
de la femme au
the
sein
shifting place of woman
de la définition chrétienne, catholique
in
du
the
mariage.
Christian tradition of marriage.
Et je vais établir un petit préalable.
But first of all, a short preamble. I want to underline a fact of the theory of parenthood.
Après donc une forte crise dans les années
After
60,
a very strong
70,
crisis in the 70s,
l'anthropologie de la parenté presque
where
disparaître.
anthropology of parenthood nearly
Les
disappeared,
anthropologues ont appris
anthropologists
de
have
façon
learned
de plus en plus forte à décentrer leur
to
regard
decentralize and to look away from the genealogical grid, which was at the center of the approaches of anthropologists who works on parenthood.
Dans les années 70,
In the
il y a
1970s,
deux irruptions, à mon
there
sens,
were
fortes,
two eruptions that changed the way
de travailler à l'anthropologie de
to
la
work anthropology of parenthood. On one side, there is the introduction through the thematization of incest,
Chicago, ensuite en France,
first in Chicago and then in France with Françoise Héritier,
la thématisation
through the
du corps
thematization of the relational body that is always present in different cultures, to define who can have sexual relations with whom. And what will be the focus of my attention today, we can see from authors, mainly Anglo-Saxon authors, we can see a new theme emerging, that of transcendence, associated with the fact of parenthood. This transcendence is presented to us by Leach and Needham from their work on societies that practice what anthropologists call generalized exchange, in which a marriage is systematically or very frequently associated with the creation of the cosmos, or the birth of the world. And at the same time as we have these new things that are arriving and call for epistemological vigilance, we have to study parenthood from what is ours, our own terms of parenthood, and then on the field have this epistemological vigilance that tried to give back the notions of parenthood that seem obvious to us. Marriage, for example. So from there, and coinciding with this movement, that anthropologists turn to Western societies, contemporary Western societies, Marilyn Strathern as well. There was a happy coincidence there. European parenthood that takes its roots in Christianity became, little by little, a legitimate object for anthropology, as Irene was saying. This anthropology that would take care of faraway societies, whereas sociology was taking care of the family societies. What I'm going to present today talks about these considerations. So I'm going to talk about the shifting place in the definition of Christian marriage of the woman between the late antiquity and the late Middle Ages. These shifting places is made on a constant basis, that of a particular love, the reference to a particular love that would come before other types of love, love for the spouse, because we have to think that normally the text is announced through a masculine ego, that is always speaking. So love for one spouse, from the beginning, for the Christians, comes before other love, and especially the love you have for one's parents. So if I can, I'd like to show you a slide, a passage of one of the major texts in this construction of a parenthood system in Europe, in my opinion. Where Paul talks about family happiness. And I had another version here of the epistle of Paul. I'm going to read it.
Aimez votre femme
Men,
à
love
l'exemple de
your
Christ.
wives
Il a aimé
like
l'Église,
Christ
il
did.
s'est
He
livré
loved
pour
the
elle.
church. He
Déjà,
gave
on
himself
établit un
for the
parallèle
church.
entre
So there is a
l'amour de
parallel
Christ
between
pour l'Église, son épouse
the love of
mystique,
Christ
et
for
l'amour de
his mystical
l'homme pour sa
spouse, the church, and
Il
the
voulait la
love of
rendre
man
sainte
for
en
woman.
la purifiant
He
par le
wanted
bain
to
du
purify
baptême et
her
la parole
by.
de vie. Il voulait se la présenter à lui-même,
He wanted.
cette Église,
I'm sorry, translating Saint Paul is just.
sans tache ni ride, ni aucun défaut. Il la voulait sainte et irréprochable. C'est comme cela que le mari doit aimer sa femme.
And this is how a husband
Là,
should love his
c'est
wife.
un grand impératif. Comme son propre corps. C'est lui qui aime sa femme,
The one
s'aime
who loves
soi-même.
his woman loves himself.
Jamais personne n'a
No one
méprisé son
ever
propre corps.
despised
contraire,
one's own body.
Nourri.
On the
On en prend
opposite,
soin. C'est ce
it
que
is
fait le Christ
nourished,
pour l'Église.
and that's what Christ does for the church.
Parce que nous sommes les membres de son corps.
Because
Parce
we are
nous sommes les
members
membres
of
de
his
son corps.
body,
Comme le dit l'Écriture,
like
à
the
cause de
scriptures
cela,
say. Because of
l'homme
that,
quittera son père et sa mère,
man will
il
leave
s'attachera à sa
his
femme, et
father
tous
and
les
mother
deux ne feront
and
qu'une
will
seule chair.
join his wife
Ce
in
mystère
one
est
flesh.
grand.
This is a great
Je l'ai
mystery.
dit en pensant au Christ et
I
à
say it
l'Église.
thinking of
Pour en
Christ and the
revenir à
church.
Chacun
And
doit aimer sa propre
about
femme
you,
comme
each
lui-même.
one of you
Et la
must
femme
love
doit
his
avoir du
wife
respect
as
pour
you
son
love
mari.
yourself. And
Donc c'est un texte,
a woman should have respect for her
central
husband.
dans la construction
So it's
de
a
la-
very
de la
central
parenté,
text in the construction
chrétienne, dans
of
la
a
mesure où
Christian
c'est répété
parenthood,
constamment.
and it
On
will
va
be
les
quoted
gloser.
many times.
Comme vous voyez, donc, il y a là un passage dans
And as
l'Ancien
you can see,
Testament,
there is a
la
passage
deuxième
in the Old
version,
Testament,
deuxième
in
récit des origines de
the,
Genèse,
the,
là où l'homme
the tale of the
se
origin,
révèle
Genesis,
pour la
where
femme,
man
il
is
est
revealed
content.
to woman.
Les javistes commentent, c'est pourquoi l'homme quittera son père et sa mère.
That's why man will leave his father and mother and will join his wife in one flesh.
En reprenant ce passage de l'Ancien Testament, donc
But
on
if we
rajoute
see
quelque chose
this
de
passage
nouveau,
of
c'est
the
le
Old
thème de
Testament,
l'amour.
there's something new, the theme of
L'amour
love,
qui,
a love
en fait, il faut les rapprocher
that
des philosophies stoïciennes de l'époque,
must
qui
be
thématisent les
linked
liens du
with the
mariage
Stoician
à ce
philosophies
thème-là,
of the time,
aussi avec l'image d'une
with the
union
image
parfaite
of
des
a
corps
perfect union
et des
of the
âmes,
bodies and
du
the
mari et de
souls
l'épouse,
of
qui vont
the
lier un
husband and
attachement
wife,
particulier.
a
Ce thème du
particular
corps
attachment.
va donner
The
lieu
theme
au
of the
développement
body
de tout un système de prohibition
will give
matrimoniale
birth to a
particulière.
whole system of matrimonial.
Puisque je deviens un seul
And
corps,
so if I become one body with
ces
my
consanguins
spouse,
deviennent mes apparentés, mes parents. Je
her
ne peux pas
family become
épouser mes
my
affaires.
family, and I cannot
Cela
marry
va
my
s'affirmer
own
progressivement,
family.
c'est particulier.
And this will.
On va établir un système de parenté exogen. Bon, mais ça,
So
on va-
there's going to be a
c'est-
system
c'est
of
des choses très
parenthood.
importantes, on va laisser de côté.
It's
On va
very
se
important,
centrer
but we're going to
plutôt
leave that
sur ce thème
aside
de l'amour,
and
un
focus
amour
on
qui
the
est
theme of
pensé à
love
partir de cette
that
image
is thought
de
of from
l'union
this
de
image
Dieu
of the
avec les
union
hommes
of
et Christ avec l'Église.
the Christ with the church.
Alors, ce texte a été bien sûr
So
traduit au
this
latin,
text
la
was
Vulgate a fait
translated
un
from the
une
Latin
version.
into
Il
Latin,
faut savoir que là où on nous dit
and where we're being told
ce mystère est grand,
that this is a great mystery,
ce qui dit le texte grec,
what the Greek text
le
says.
texte latin dit
The Latin text says
sacramentum magnum. Ça, c'est un grand sacrement.
it's a great sacrament.
Là, cette traduction fautive
This
va donner lieu, comme vous savez, tout à
mistake
l'heure,
in
plus
translation
tard,
will
au
give
débat
rise to
entre
the
protestants et
debate
catholiques.
between the Protestants and the Catholics.
Alors, pendant l'époque carolingienne,
At the time of
cette référence
the Carolingians,
sacramentum
this
sera
reference
remplie
to
avec un
sacramentum
contenu très précis.
will be filled by a very precise
Le signe
consent,
visible de l'union
the visible
invisible
sign
de
of the
l'Église
invisible union of the church in Jesus
serait l'union charnelle.
will be the carnal union
Par là,
through which
on va établir donc
we're
un
going
système de
to
production
establish a
matrimoniale
system of matrimonial
qui veut
production
que
which
dans cette union charnelle,
says that
il y a cette
in this
rédéfinition
carnal union,
identitaire, tous les deux deviennent une seule chair,
they
tous les deux
both
donc
become one flesh
acceptent ou
and
prennent
both
comme
accept or
apparentés
take
un
as
consanguin de l'autre.
parents
C'est pourquoi un homme ne
the
peut
parents
pas
of the
épouser
other. And this
la
is why
sœur
a
ou la
man
cousine
cannot
de
marry
sa maîtresse.
the sister
Pas de
or cousin
son-
of her
son
mistress.
épouse, mais de sa
We're not talking
maîtresse.
about his wife, but his
C'est le sexe
mistress.
qui est vecteur donc de
So the sex is
sacramentalité
a
et
vector of
dépendance.
sacramentality and parenthood.
Néanmoins, bien que donc le haut
But
moyen-âge
although
définisse comme
the
ça
early Middle Ages
la
define it
sacramentalité
thus,
du
the
mariage
sacramentality of a Christian
donc la
marriage,
sexualité, il y a la
and
sexualité individuelle, il y a une place
individual
déterminante
sexuality has
dans la
a
constitution des
pride
groupes
of
de
place
parenté, de la
in the
parentèle.
constitution of parenthood
Il y a une
groups.
définition du mariage
There is a definition of wedding
s'oppose au
that
concubinage,
opposes
qui fait du lien matrimonial
and which
un
turns
élément
matrimonial
éminemment
links
social.
into a very social element.
un mariage sous
A marriage,
la plume de Igmar de Reims, qui est un
and
grand
Igmar de
évêque,
Reims,
théoricien.
who was a great theoretical
Cet
bishop,
évêque-là, les mariages
for this
proprement
bishop,
dit n'est valable qu'entre deux
marriage
personnes
itself
de
is only
condition
valid
sociale
between two
équivalente,
people of equivalent social
dûment dotées,
condition, sustained by approval from their respective fathers. So this is not surprising for an anthropologist, sociologist, or a historian, but this is going to change radically. Through a change which seems to be minor, but that is that of the engagement. The Christian engagements were thought of in the light of the Roman engagement, which created parenthood already. Unlike Roman engagement, Christian engagement, which were already part of marriage, could not be dissolved. And so it was a pact, a matrimonial promise that came to inaugurate the matrimonial union. And this pact was between the hands not of the boy and the girl who were getting married, but of the paterfamilias, the father, who could control it. All this begins to change thanks to some theologians like Yves de Chartres. But also especially Pierre Lombard. For Pierre Lombard, in the sentences, the cause of marriage is consentment, through a promise expressed not for the future but for the present. We have to pronounce words of the present so that a marriage can be valid, can begin existing. And this will give rise to a definition of marriage by which, where there is an exchange of words of the present, I take you as my wife, then there is a marriage, independently from what the parents can say. I'll leave that aside concerning the different theologians and popes who have said very important things about marriage. For example, Alexander III, in the middle of the 12th century, says that if there was an exchange of consentment between two people, it was not legitimate for another man to marry this woman if she came to marry someone else. She had to be separated from her second husband and given back to the first, even though there might have been a copulation. So this transformation also leans on a transformation of the ritual of marriage. In the 12th century, we're going to change gradually the ritual of marriage, and it will be preferably in front of the church, but there will be a special role given to the priest, who must ask a number of questions to the newlyweds. First of all, one has to find out whether their parents, and especially they have to find out about the will of the contractants, especially the young girl, because young girls were often pressured into accepting her husband by their family. So it becomes important to find out about her will, to find out if she is consenting. In the 12th century, Mateus de Braga gives directions to the priest, saying if there is love, to find out if there is love between them, and if they're not parents, then they can get married. This situation is in clear contrast with what was there before, and with the fathers of the church. Chrysostome,
Jean Chrysostome, dans une de ses homélies, il aborde souvent
he very often deals with matrimonial unions, and he advises the parents not to pay too much attention to the material well-being of the newlyweds. But
rien de plus suave que la tempérance, rien de plus désirable que l'honneur, que les noces soient telles que je les demande, et l'on verra quel plaisir on y trouve. Faites bien attention aux conditions que je pose. Pour une jeune fille, il faut
for a young woman, the conditions are she has to find a husband who can be at the same time her husband, her protector, her tutor. There is a body on which a head must be put. So the hierarchy is repeated. And also what is said in implicit ways, that the father is going to choose a husband for the bride. And Saint Augustine is going to talk about the very special links between the Church and Christ. And by talking about this special link, he's going to have a commentary on how a young girl should be treated. So a young girl should not love her fiancé, because love in the epistle is something that is derived from the marriage. It doesn't come before the marriage. The marriage is conceived as a source of love, caritas. And so love comes from marriage and not the other way around. So in that sense, Augustine advises a young virgin not to love her fiancé. And I quote, do not love, you will love when you have become a woman, a wife. And this is true, because for her it would be a premature desire to love a man of whom she is not sure she will become the wife. So it is possible that a man be engaged and another becomes her husband. In the 12th century, early 12th century, theologians tried to gradually transform these notions. Yves de Chartres, who works on the Gregorian reform, is going to insist on the necessary consenting by the bride and her husband, and not just the will of the father. For an engagement, this consentment must be is a requirement. And this is why, as in the case for marriage, the girl of the family must consent to the engagement. And later, if the man refuses, the engagement cannot be made in his name. So for Yves de Chartres, again, the engagement is part of the definition of marriage, according to him. So this seems trivial because it comes from ecclesiastical authorities, but it starts with very profound meanings. And Gratien repeats the same point, which will come to its full dimension when Lucius II, at the end of the 12th century, establishes that there is no rape, and that marriage is valid when a young woman is swept away by her husband to move away from the constraints of the family. Some theologians, most of them, like Bonaventure, a Franciscan, share this opinion. He said the marriage contract should be free. It is going too fast, I'm sorry. And in the 12th century, the matrimonial contract is in the registry of marital affection, while distancing himself from the previous definition, sociological one, by... It is not the dowry which is necessary, but the affectiousness that makes a marriage. The rest is secondary. I'm sorry about that, but translating the quotes from the 12th century on the fly is really difficult. I'm going to concentrate now on the theological basis of this transformation, maybe to establish an exchange with you later. In fact, there is a very important theologian, Hugh de Saint-Victor, who will have a very strong influence on Lombard, who develops a very special theology of the Christian person, and who is going to give a new content to this sacramentum magnum, this sacrality of marriage, because he's going to talk about a double sacrality. He's not going to question that the sexual union is the visible sign of the union of Christ and Church. He's not going to question that. He's going to say, by leaning on Joseph and the Virgin, who had never consumed their marriage, that there is something primeval about the sexual act to understand what marriage is, because it is written, he took his wife and went to Egypt. So they were married. They had never consumed their marriage. So it's a classical case in the debate, in the theological debate. So we have to look for what else there is, and more importantly, what visible sign is there. We need another one to tell us about what marriage really is, and that's consentment. So he talks about Saint Augustine. And insists on the fact that the spouses, consenting spouses, or those who cannot have children anymore because they're too old, are still spouses. So we shouldn't focus on fecundity. For him, the visible sign of what makes a marriage, this voluntary union, this visible sign, the willing union of two spouses, is a sign of an invisible union of man with God. So gradually a subject is being introduced here. Whereas marriage shifts towards a voluntary act founded upon love. Love ceases to be what comes after marriage and becomes what brings people to marriage. And it's clear that men and women should unite when they feel a true voluntary love, because if it isn't, it could not be the object of a sacrament. In Genesis, this description of the union of men and women, Hughes uses a very analytical way. So he describes the double nature of the matrimonial union, the one I've just presented, by establishing the primacy of the voluntary union. And he analyzes, he will be attached to his wife. This is not said of the... This was said so that we can understand that the conjugal sacrament is of a spiritual order, and for what is added, there will be two in one flesh. Let's recognize here the conjugal, which is accomplished in the flesh.
Voilà que la décomposition de la phrase biblique, l'étude séparée des deux verbes qui s'y trouvent, établit la priorité.
So it establishes the chronological priority of the effect as opposed to a marital sexuality. And Hugues questions that once again, why would man leave his father and mother to go with his wife? And the answers given So the reason why man leaves his father and mother to go with his wife comes from this unique society in which he is owed to the other. So the father and mother are the principle from which man comes, and where love is the end. This is the only condition of being a human being which engenders love. So it is love alone that throws forth the choice. That's why every man loves his mother and father, because he has received life from them. But he loves his spouse more because he has chosen to live with her forever. A divine sacrament and deep mystery, of course, but a beautiful. From the principle we come to the being, and in the end we receive happiness through choice. So we must understand that for Hughes, he is inscribed in what the Franciscans are going to develop more clearly later, a vision of the world that doesn't see the world as a kind of a necessity of a realized immanence, but rather like the expression of divine freedom. God could have created another world, but he's chosen to create this one, so when man chooses, he gets closer to divinity. He becomes more of a man, more fully. So in this choice, this is through this choice that we have to understand this definition. Very shortly, but very slowly, please. And the place of women in all this is that she becomes in this sphere, and only in this sphere, and it's a very important sphere, we agree on this, she becomes the equal of men. If there is no family consentment, there is no marriage, and the door is open for her to flee, something that is going to happen. And this state of being is going to trigger reactions within the church. People are going to oppose this definition. And outside the church as well, civil power, like the Italian cities or the natural law, the Aspartides of this king, give right to the parents for the children who would disobey in this could lose their inheritance. And Protestants say, no, it's a wrong translation. The sacramentum magnum does not exist. There is no sacrament of marriage, it's a contract. And a contract must be entered by people who are old enough. And at the time, he was 14 years of age for boys and 12 for the girls. So long before they were 18. So the Protestants will go this way, and the Catholics who were going along the same path are going to need to reaffirm the sacrality of marriage and consensuality, matrimonial consensuality, but it's going to develop later, and it's going to evolve, curiously, in the 18th century towards a renewed control, with the illustration of the Age of Enlightenment with antecedents in France, a new model into which the state is a warranty of the matrimonial order, and the parents receive new rights to have an influence on their parents, on their children's wedding, marriage. It's the Austrian laws, the Portuguese laws, who are going to, at the same time, give new rights to the parents with modernity to control the excess of freedom of children in the matrimonial sphere. But that's a different chapter, and I'll stop here.